London unveiled one of its rare, perfect mornings, that Tuesday air thin and cold enough to sketch your breath. Sunlight already flirting with the palace facade, the Union Jack cracking like a starter's pistol overhead. Alistair Greaves, billionaire architect of a globe-spanning logistics empire, was skimming the day's agenda as he paced past Buckingham Palace when a sharp, urgent stream of Mandarin shattered the tourist chatter. Phones froze mid-selfie. The voice belonged not to a diplomat or guide, but to a crimson-clad Coldstream guard, statue-still, bare-skinned, towering rifle, glinting who without so much as blinking steered a lost Chinese dignitary to the VIP gate in flawless Beijing cadence. Before the crowd could recover, the same marble figure pivoted effortlessly into Spanish then French, each sentence slicing through the morning like clean glass. In that electric hush, Graves felt the day, and possibly his company's future, rearrange itself around a man everyone else had mistaken for decoration. London served up one of those hard blue mornings when the air bit just enough to carve your breath, while sunlight already burnished Buckingham Palace for later display. The Union Jack cracked overhead like a starter's pistol, gravel snapped beneath polished shoes, and tour buses exhaled passengers who drifted toward the railings with selfie sticks raised like antennae seeking wonder. Alistair Greaves, architect of Halion Global's 15,000-person logistics web, strode past scrolling profit forecasts, mentally tagging the scarlet-coated Coldstream guards as static decor. 10 paces beyond Canada Gate, his routine fractured a volley of urgent newsroom-perfect Mandarin ricocheted across the forecourt. Tourists stopped mid-pose scanning for a translator until eyes settled on a bearskin-topped sentry whose rifle still mirrored the sky. The guard's lips barely moved, yet the Beijing crisp syllables sliced the chill like steam from a cracked teapot. A middle-aged woman who moments earlier had insisted the guards aren't even allowed to blink, gasped loud enough to rattle nearby pigeons. As the panicked dignitary clutching a leather briefcase relaxed under the sentry's guidance, Greaves felt his meticulously scheduled morning tilt sideways. An unseen domino had toppled inside his day, and all his spreadsheets suddenly seemed like scenery. Sergeant Idris Nouri had perfected invisibility by mastering stillness, but the road to such marble calm was forged in motion. He grew up on Birchfield Road in Birmingham's Handsworth, where overtime paid the rent, and languages drifted through a two-up, two-down like aromatic steam. His father intoned dawn prayers in Moroccan Arabic, his mother rehearsed lesson plans in French, and his grandmother scolded in Kabyle whenever the kettle overwhistled. Idris hawked newspapers outside a Punjabi grocer, memorized Spanish lyrics blasted by neighbors, devoured dog-eared Mandarin textbooks from the library, and traded homework help for Portuguese vocabulary with a Brazilian barber. Italian arrived via his mother's afternoon cooking shows, Farsi, during late-night taxi rides with an Afghan driver who needed conversation to stay awake. By 19, he slipped through 9 tongues as effortlessly as other recruits cleared obstacle walls, so the army felt like the logical crucible for his discipline. The Coldstream Guards prized symmetry over speech, and Idris found solace in parade square geometry until the crowds arrived. That same tourist who doubted the guards' English sparked only a microscopic twitch in his peripheral vision. Minutes later, the courtyard filled with frantic Mandarin from a lost delegate waving documents at baffled palace security. Protocol flirted with disaster until Idris, still statue straight, spoke Qingbie, Dengxin Xiansheng. The reception is through the main arch. Each syllable landed like a life raft. Relief washed over the visitor. Radios crackled, and for an instant, the entire courtyard seemed to breathe in unison. The hush that followed wasn't silence, but compression, an intake of collective awe. Alistair Greaves, normally capable of cost-benefit analyzing a continent in stride, stood rooted. The numbers on his phone dissolved into hieroglyphs. Edging to the rope line, he waved off a palace marshal. "Where did you learn Mandarin like that?" he asked, first in English, then in polished Parisian French to test a hunch. The sentry stared ahead, granite still. A teenager nearby scoffed, bet he doesn't even speak English. As if turning pages, Idris answered Greaves in flawless French, spun to reassure the teenager in Castilian, sharp Spanish, then guided a lost couple in operatic Italian toward the ticket office. Each tongue sounded native, each transition frictionless enough to make polyglottism look like sleight of hand. Phones lifted, yet no one dared puncture the moment with a shutter click. Gravies felt the hidden gears of opportunity lurch into a new alignment. A talent of boardroom magnitude was drawing Sergeant's pay while saving a diplomatic morning in 30 seconds. He pressed a business card into a security captain's palm requesting a meeting the instant duty ended. For the rest of the reception, string quartets, canapes, polite speeches, he heard only echoes of Idris's multilingual calm. That night, back in a Battersea flat barely larger than his childhood bedroom, Idris read the encrypted message waiting on his phone. Sergeant Nouri, your composure today solved a £1 million problem in half a minute. I'd value a conversation. AG. He stared at the screen, weighing silence against possibility, and for the first time since enlistment, felt his ceremonial uniform tighten with unexplored futures. The Dorchester's private suite, all hushed velvet and chandelier glow, felt miles from parade ground austerity when Idris stepped in, wearing his dress blues, a deliberate declaration of origin. Alistair Graves rose from a leather chair matching Idris's salute with a measured handshake that broadcast both respect and calculation. They skipped small talk. Graves described a problem money had never solved, executives armed with data, but deaf to nuanced strategies, unraveling in Shanghai or Sao Paulo because hello landed wrong. Idris listened posture straight as a rifle while silverware chimed in the background. Graves outlined a role that didn't yet exist. Chief cultural strategist, equal parts, negotiator, interpreter, anthropologist, firelifter of invisible frictions. Base salary 180K, equity bonuses tied to avoided fiascos, global authority to veto deals that ignored context. Idris asked why a crisis-minute performance qualified him for boardroom permanence. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small, but very big and too valuable. Graves replied that anyone who could shepherd panic into calm without breaking discipline possessed a rarer asset than MBA's actionable empathy. Idris countered that the guards had honed that discipline. Remove the forge and you risk dulling the blade. The CEO's eyes narrowed, not in disagreement, but in assessment of cost. Then we make the forge portable, he said, signaling willingness to bend a corporate org chart around a soldier's code. Coffee cooled untouched, yet by dessert, they had drawn tentative contours of a partnership, one contingent on a promise Idris had not yet articulated even to himself. Back in his Battersea flat, Idris laid his bearskin beside a half-eaten takeaway and stared out at the Thames shimmer. Opportunity tugged like a foreign rhythm, seductive, disruptive. He dialed his mother. Her voice poured through the receiver, equal parts jasmine tea and iron. She reminded him how his father judged success by the number of doors one opened for others, not the number of plaques on one's own. After they hung up, he folded a sheet of paper into 2 columns. Left camaraderie ritual polished the quiet pride of standing sentinel over history. Right leverage for language's direct impact on livelihoods across continents, resources to fund his sister's veterinary degree. The lists balanced until a third notion emerged between them. Service scaled, not abandoned. At dawn, he texted Graves one sentence: I accept conditional on retaining 2 guard shifts a week, unpaid, non-negotiable. The reply pinged before Reveille approved. Your discipline is part of the offer. Idris reported to Wellington Barracks that morning, lighter than any inspection would detect, because the decision felt less like leaving and more like adding concentric circles to the same target. 6 months later, on the 32nd floor of Hilarions Glass Tower, Idris juggled a tri-continental video call toggling among Brazilian Portuguese, Indonesian, and Midland soft English, as though each were a radio preset. He diffused a pricing misunderstanding before it metastasized into litigation, then redirected the conversation towards shared customs, festive calendars, supplier family obligations, local transit strikes, turning abstract metrics into human schedules. Veterans of mergers and acquisitions took notes as if auditing a class they'd never known existed. The meeting ended 32 minutes early with unanimous signatures, saving Helion an estimated $2.7 million in delay fees. Idris logged the outcome changed into scarlet tunic, and by noon was back at Buckingham Palace boots, reflecting a sky that tourists framed between smartphone brackets. Whispers rippled that one speaks 9 languages and negotiates for some big firm, but still stands here. Phones drifted lower. Eyes lingered longer. Respect thickened the air in ways even Idris could feel, though his gaze remained fixed. He understood now that stillness could be motion, that a century-silent square could echo across boardrooms oceans away, and that the best bridges anchor firmly on both banks. Inside, Sergeant Idris's arrival shifted the company's center of gravity in ways quarterly reports could actually measure. He christened his remit context, first auditing every cross-border project for unspoken assumptions, the way engineers inspect for hairline cracks. In a Hong Kong conference room, he rewrote a launch slogan whose Cantonese homophone meant empty coffin, sparing marketing from viral mockery. In Sao Paulo, he flipped a supply chain stalemate by recognizing that the factory's patron saint holiday trumped any delivery deadline. Each win felt small until finance tallied a 9-month savings curve, £18.6 million recaptured simply by not offending, misunderstanding, or rushing. Skeptical VPs who had once regarded him as translation garnish now queued for 30-minute cultural calibrations emerging, clutching annotated dossiers thicker than passports. Yet the most telling proof surfaced outside the office. Executives who used to bark orders now began meetings with a genuine bom dia or ni hao, and procurement managers scheduled calls around Ramadan or Diwali without prompting. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, though, Idris still woke before dawn to polish brass and lace boots. He greeted recruits at Wellington Barracks with the same steady nod, then marched to Buckingham Palace, where tourist camera angles sometimes sank, as if realizing the crimson figure was not a mannequin, but a hinge between worlds. Bridging boardrooms and battlements left Idris exhausted in the marrow, yet oddly whole, because he no longer felt as though he were switching lives, only widening the aperture through which service could pour. The test that proved the model came unannounced one muggy August night when a refrigerated cargo vessel bound for Osaka stalled at Port Klang after Malaysian customs flagged its paperwork as incomplete and culturally insensitive. The phrase made no sense until Idris, jolted from sleep by an urgent call, skimmed the email chain. A junior analyst had copied the Japanese client on a Malay language invoice that translated literally hinted their temp-controlled fish might rot on arrival, an idiom meaning sell quickly in local markets, but an omen of disgrace in Japan. 48 tons of premium tuna now sat on melting ice while lawyers sharpened indemnity clauses. Idris boarded the dawn flight to Kuala Lumpur, meeting port officials over kopi o. In fluid Malay, he apologized for the idiom, praised their precision that protects halal integrity, and offered a charitable seafood donation in Halian's name to honor Hungry Ghost Festival, which happened to start that week. The gesture reframed the delay as community goodwill. Customs released the containers, and Idris phoned Osaka in formal Keigo Japanese, accepting accountability and dispatching a quality control chemist to certify freshness. What could have been a 7-figure spoilage claim dissolved into a press release celebrating cross-cultural stewardship and a photo op of tuna steaks feeding Klang orphanages. Back in London, the board digested the timeline in stunned silence. Greaves finally slapped the table and declared the incident a textbook save that would anchor next quarter's shareholder letter. Idris merely updated his playbook idioms. He noted can freight perishable goods more dangerously than humidity ever will. 1 year to the day after the Mandarin moment, Halian's annual summit convened beneath glass atria overlooking the Thames. Idris opened proceedings not with a keynote, but with a simulation. Delegates wore headsets piping mismatched languages while negotiating a mock merger. Within minutes, frustration spiked, deals stalled, and laughter gave way to humility. Then Idris removed the barriers, translating in real time, and the room felt the gears click, an audible lesson in hidden effort. When the applause settled, Graves awarded him equity certificates printed on parchment, thick enough to rival commissioning scrolls. Yet Idris broke protocol by inviting 3 junior translators on stage to share credit, arguing that bridges endure only when many hands carry the span. Later that evening, Sandhurst Commandant cornered him with an offer to lecture on adaptive leadership. A venture fund dangled a partner track. A streaming giant pitched a docuseries. Idris accepted none. At dawn, he was back on parade, the Union Jack snapping overhead, tourists clustering behind railings. A child perched on her father's shoulders asked why the guard wore shiny story boots, and Idris, without shifting posture, felt a quiet grin surface inside the stillness. The world might see him as soldier strategist or symbol, but he measured success by a simpler metric, whether the spaces between cultures felt narrower tonight than they did this morning. On that score, with every disciplined breath that misted in the London air, he judged the day victorious. By Idris's second year, the context-first doctrine had outgrown its creator, morphing into a 20-person bridge corps that audited every Halion initiative before a single procurement form crossed borders. Idris recruited polyglots from Nairobi, call centers, Jakarta coffee houses, and Buenos Aires tech hubs favoring lived fluency over pedigreed accents. He told HR to ignore resumes that listed languages as bullet points and instead ask candidates to mediate an argument laid between two strangers. Meanwhile, his own calendar became a pendulum. Mondays, he deconstructed regional subtexts for board committees. Tuesday dawns, he shouldered a rifle and stood beneath palace battlements, where children now pointed not just at the bearskin, but at the name stitched above his metal ribbons. One fog-veiled morning, a class of primary school visitors clustered near his post. A boy with a stammer wanted to ask how a soldier learned so many languages, but words snagged in his throat. Idris broke protocol by meeting the child's gaze and whispering soft enough that only the teacher heard, "Take your time. Every language begins with a pause." The child inhaled, asked his question, and Idris answered in gentle Midlands English that carried all the way to the railings. Later that week, Guardveil forwarded Idris an internal survey. Incidence of cultural friction had fallen 63%, contract renegotiations, 48% travel budgets by a third, because fewer damage control flights were required. Finance praised the savings, yet Idris measured progress elsewhere during a Sao Paulo call when a supply chain director instinctively switched to her vendor's native Guarani, or in a Tokyo warehouse, where a forklift bore a sign reading, "Safety is everyone's honor," penned by a junior manager who had attended Idris's lunchtime micro-seminar on concept-driven translation. The Bridge Corps, once an experiment, was now threaded through operations charts like rebar. Still, each Thursday found its founder stock-still outside Buckingham Boots, reflecting the slow unfurl of another morning. Recognition eventually breached the palace walls. On a chilly March evening, Idris's mother received a letter stamped with the royal crest inviting her to an investiture where her son would be appointed MBE for services to cultural diplomacy and ceremonial excellence. She made the trip clutching a handbag older than Idris's career and sat beside venture capitalists and opera sopranos while her son received the medal and scarlet tunic. In the audience, Guardveil felt an unexpected tug, not pride, but perspective. The man he'd hired to fix miscommunications had quietly redefined what his company stood for. Weeks later, during a strategy offsite in the Lake District, Guardveil announced his plan to transition to chairman and offered Idris the title of Chief Global Integration Officer, C-suite corner office stock options with commas in unlikely places. Idris requested 48 hours. He paced fells at dawn, boots wet with heather, recalling advice from his father. Promotions amplify what you already carry. Be certain the echo is one you can live with. Back in London, he thanked Guardveil, yet declined the corner office, accepting instead a hybrid post that let him deploy Bridge Corps graduates as regional leads while he remained both mentor and field operative. Strategy needs altitude, he said, but bridges need load-bearing pillars on the ground. I'd rather be a pillar. The board ratified the compromise partly because quarterly profits had jumped 11% on cultural savings alone, partly because investors liked a narrative that sounded almost philanthropic while still juicing margins. Idris marked the decision in the only ritual that mattered to him, a pre-dawn polish of his parade boots blacking, catching the reflection of a city waking to possibilities it barely understood. Autumn draped Buckingham Palace in bronze when the story completed its quiet loop. A new cohort of guards, some recruited after reading about the 9-language century, filed onto the forecourt for final inspection, nerves fizzing beneath crimson wool. Idris, now part-time color sergeant, walked the line, correcting subtle posture errors, but when a recruit with Nigerian roots greeted him in Yoruba, Idris replied instantly, earning a grin that steadied trembling shoulders. Across the gravel, a cluster of tourists adjusted lenses. One teenage vlogger whispered, "That's the guy who saves million-pound deals," and kept her phone lowered out of respect. At precisely 10:43, the band struck up Heart of Oak and Idris snapped to attention, rifle aligned with the axis of history. He felt the familiar reunion of stillness and motion muscles, locked yet mind-ranging across time zones where colleagues now solved their own misunderstandings before they sparked. Somewhere in Osaka, a quality control chief was using the Malay idiom lesson to rewrite hazard labels. In Kuala Lumpur, a port officer was sharing kopi with an intern from Manchester, who spoke her dialect because Bridge Corps had made dialect mastery a badge of honor. Idris breathed, counting heartbeats as he'd been trained, and understood that the distance between ceremonial ground and global boardroom was precisely the span of one disciplined life. The Union Jack cracked overhead, tourists exhaled in collective wonder, and Idris Nouri, bridge builder, in scarlet and steel, let the moment settle like a final perfect translation, proof that service scaled outward loses nothing at its core, and that the quietest guard can tilt the architecture of empires simply by standing still and speaking the right words at exactly the right time. 12 months after the investiture, Bridge Corps had become the corporate world's worst-kept secret, fielding discreet inquiries from ministries and multinationals that previously believed culture was a poster in the lobby. Idris resisted franchising the unit, insisting on slow growth. Bridges collapsed when stretched faster than concrete cures. Even so, demand overtook caution the morning the Foreign Office summoned him to Whitehall. A tri-nation green hydrogen pact was on life support. The Kenyan delegation felt patronized by British legalese, while the Norwegian Energy Consortium complained the Swahili translators lacked the technical vocabulary for electrolyzer warranties. Idris took the brief, flew to Nairobi with 2 bridge analysts and 1 retired Royal Marine who could diagram contracts like battle plans. In the Kenyatta Convention Center, he convened a midnight session serving Sukuma Wiki and Gravlax side by side while he toggled between engineering jargon in Norsk and Sheng slang that melted tension into laughter. By dawn, the delegates had co-drafted a glossary that satisfied patent lawyers and village grid activists alike. And when the pact was signed a fortnight later, The Economist credited an unnamed linguistic mediator for rescuing a $6 billion climate deal. Within Halayan, the anecdote became onboarding lore mastery was not just about knowing words, but knowing when to swap a mahogany boardroom for a plastic cafeteria tray, because dignity can taste like someone else's home cooking. Idris returned to London in time for Thursday guard duty, his rifle aligned with Buckingham's stone lions, and thought about how oxygen produced in Kenyan desert plants would soon power Trondheim buses, 2 ends of a pipeline joined by conversation rather than steel. Importance inevitably invited scrutiny. A veteran columnist framed Idris as the lone savior of British soft power, a burden he disliked but couldn't ignore when Parliament's Defense Committee called him to testify on language readiness in modern conflict. The hearing room smelled of dust and ambition. Some MPs saw only a ceremonial uniform and expected platitudes. Instead, they received a concise audit: 32 military incidents in 5 years where mistranslation escalated. Hostility contrasted with Idris's data sets showing how pre-deployment dialect briefings cut village checkpoint clashes by half. When a skeptical member asked why taxpayers should fund polyglots instead of drones, Idris replied, "Drones end fights. Dialect ends the need for them." The quote detonated on social media, and within weeks, a pilot language liaison corps mirrored Bridge Corps inside the MOD. Critics howled over costs until the first quarterly review revealed $48 million saved on reduced security incidents and goodwill contracts signed with communities from Helmand to Horn of Africa. Halayan's board braced for Idris's resignation. Surely government would poach him, but he stayed arguing. The private and public programs were 2 columns of the same bridge. He negotiated a memorandum letting bridge cadets rotate through military placements, cross-pollinating best practices, while Idris kept his dual appointment. On Palace gravel, the Friday crowd swelled with schoolchildren holding homemade "Thank You, Sergeant Nouri" banners. Protocol forbade acknowledgement, yet Idris felt the gesture reverberate deeper than any medal because it proved comprehension was contagious. A decade later, Idris's careers in plural resembled intertwined strands of rope, impossible to tell where soldier ended and strategist began. Bridge Corps had replicated across 4 continents, each node autonomous, yet anchored in the founding principle etched above the London office entrance. Listen first, the world is speaking. His guard shifts were fewer now. Ceremonial majors joked they borrowed him from history, but he still requested dawn slots on national holidays, craving the meditative stillness that had taught him to hear nuance in the first place. On his 50th birthday, he stood outside Buckingham as sunrise bled gold across the Victoria Memorial. A teenage tourist approached after the changing, and in hesitant Arabic asked if learning 9 languages was worth the effort. Idris answered in the boy's native Maghrebi dialect, a subtle callback to his own kitchen table roots. Worth is measured by doors you open for others. Every new word is a key. The boy's eyes widened the same ignition Idris had seen in boardrooms, classrooms, port offices. When the crowd dispersed, Idris glimpsed his reflection in a smartphone screen. Bearskin, tall tunic bright, but behind the regalia, a lifetime of bridges stretched some concrete, many invisible linking villages to megacities, cadets to CEOs yesterday to tomorrow. He realized that the world would remember him variously as the multilingual guard, the deal-saving strategist, the quiet reformer of military doctrine. Yet his own definition was simpler. He was a conduit through which understanding traveled. And as long as one conversation still needed translation, one misheard idiom still risked a cargo of tuna or peace, he would remain at his post. Whether that post was palace pavement, cabinet table, or the threshold of a young mind learning its first foreign greeting. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your support truly means the world to me. If this video brought you value or resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a little comment or hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more moments together. See you in the next one.